Okay, let's talk a bit about Vince McMahon because I need to make a correction because on Wednesday's show with Brandon Thurston, I had stated that the Vince McMahon documentary, I had misunderstood, and I could have sworn that Bill Simmons had mentioned something about it being a one-part documentary, but he had not. He has actually stated on the SI Media podcast, it will be multiple parts. So this will not be a just a one-off. And that had been the original way it was pitched, that this would be a multi-episode series covering Vince McMahon. So when Bill Simmons was on with Jimmy Traina this week, he was asked about the documentary. He said, it's fucking awesome. I think it's going to be, I've never seen a documentary producer that comes out beforehand and says, oh man, it's awful. it's rough. So nonetheless, the Bill Simmons, I don't think he's just, quietly pumping this thing up. But he says, I think it's going to be the first part of next year, and Chris Smith is directing it. I don't know if he's one of the 5 best documentary directors or one of the best 3 or whatever. Whatever shortlist it's on, he's on it. And we spent a lot of time on it. And I don't want to say too much. He had access to Vince, and he says, it's a few parts, and I'm very passionate about this. I think that they add parts or they make stuff longer than it needs to be because honestly, that's how you get paid more to do a documentary. This is very much Bill Simmons speak that I'm trying to do here. I'm pretty crazy about it. I want these things. Bill Simmons is going to have a multi-part documentary series involving Vince McMahon, and he is very much of the belief that a documentary, if it needs the time, give it the time, but don't. Let's not overstay our welcome if the subject doesn't warrant it. But he certainly feels, I think, a Vince McMahon documentary warrants more than a, 2-hour window. So my question to you is, and it's worth noting, Dave Meltzer had stated that he was interviewed for this, although it was a year ago when so much has changed with Vince over this last year and coming back into power. But he at least noted in his interview, there was no subject that they avoided. Like they went into everything. So I guess number one is, you have Vince McMahon's involvement here. I think it's absolutely impossible that you're not going to go over this past year, how in depth that will be, or if it's sort of just we're going to address it so that we have addressed it. I think is that what this documentary is going to be weighed upon? Like, will that be what people like you and I are going to deem of whether this is successful or not, is how they navigate that controversy of the past year?
Well, there are a lot of controversies attached to Vince McMahon's life. Every single part of this, I'm sure, will be filled.
And some of them tie in from decades ago, like the Rita Chatterton thing that resurfaced and ended with a settlement this year.
And the ones that are, that have sort of a lot more time passed on, I'm sure might be they'll freely handle that with, I think, the honesty that might be expected of it because there are fewer repercussions. This is still ongoing. This is still something that is still very much a hot topic. For everybody attached to Vince McMahon. And for that reason, I think you might expect a little bit more secrecy. But at the same time, these sort of documentaries, that's the biggest question going into this production, I would say. And not just from us, I think from a lot of mainstream press and a lot of people that are very aware of what's going on with Vince McMahon right now, that aren't even casual or even any type of WWE type of viewer. So they for sure have to tackle it for their own reputation, for the reputation of a Netflix, for the reputation of this Chris Smith, who has very, very notable credits to his name, including Tiger King. So I'm fully expecting them to, pursue it, I think, to a satisfying degree. Yeah, and again, not to appease, even just a wrestling fan, but to documentary fans and Netflix viewers.
Yeah, and in the other Bloomberg conference that Bill Simmons did, he did bring up the documentary and the idea that Vince McMahon, he stated it in like his description that Vince McMahon will get to see aspects of the documentary before we'll be able to see clips, but sounds like he does not have veto power. Which, a lot of these sports documentaries, that's how you get the big subject, is they do have an executive producer credit and they do have that ability to cut things down. I heard like David Beckham did have that, and that was considered one of the better versions of this, of a subject that you still got a really great documentary out of it. Last Dance being another one.
Maybe I haven't done enough reading it, but I think I did enough reading to know that he was not given final edit. I don't even think he was given final approval. Like, you probably had to watch it or something, but I don't think he did have a final cut on it.
Okay. Well, then that, because that is sort of this balance that a lot of these outlets are now having, is that you want to tell these giant stories with these figures, and the only way they are going to come on board is if they have, some level of involvement in all of this. This is a very interesting documentary for how I think they are so invested in it that this has to be heavily promoted by them.
Mhm.
And what is like, let's not forget, like, this could come out at a time when there could be an indictment over these next few months. Like, that is still a possible outcome here. And I mean, do they want a documentary that ends with the text on the screen? Months after the conclusion of this documentary, Vince McMahon was indicted. He will be facing court appearance.
Do you think that could be any sort of excuse for them to not maybe dive deeper into the story? I mean, are there any legal reasons why they might not be able to?
It's a cover reason that you could certainly give. And if you were Vince McMahon's lawyer, you would probably be saying, yeah, do not talk about any of this.
And would that excuse the filmmakers in the audience's eyes? You think?
No, I don't think it would. I think that, okay, Vince McMahon is not, he's not under oath here to comment on it. But I think as someone trying to document Vince McMahon as a third party, there's nothing stopping Netflix from digging in, and
right.
You have access to all of these different people, and they can no comment you, but you have to address it. You have to, or else why are we doing this? And I think that this is one where even the casual observer watching this, if you were to whitewash all of that, it would be so noticeable to the outside. Like, that was a giant story over this past year.
So coming out of this documentary, and I'm only asking for your prediction right now, does the world look at Vince McMahon more favorably than they do now, or do they look at him worse or neutral?
After the documentary airs?
Mm-hmm.
I think generally there's a pretty negative viewpoint of Vince McMahon that exists, but he is still this larger than life figure to so many. And that's why I don't doubt that if he showed up on Raw Monday night, it would be to a celebratory ovation.
Especially to a wrestling audience, a WWE
Especially
audience.
to a wrestling audience. And I think he has crossed over into this level where to many figures in, like, for instance, if Vince McMahon were to do a media tour attached to this, which I would see less likely given everything involved, I think there'd be a lot of hero worship of people that are interviewing this guy. And for all the negative stuff, it's not as if this guy lived this pristine life where his legacy was upheld to such a high degree and then hit a scandal. It's like this guy has been through all of this stuff that has sort of just followed him, that those that have the negative view of Vince, it probably wasn't a dawning that they had in July of 2022 that, oh my God, this man, what I had been following all of these years.
Is a bad person? No.
So yeah, and there's that aspect. Like there's no doubt that there is like, if you're talking about a 3-4 part documentary series that Vince McMahon would warrant it, it is like, how much are you going to be approaching this with white gloves to kind of massage his image? And what this is, like, this guy is participating in something that I think he would hope is also image enhancement.
Yeah. So I think, like, when you're doing a documentary profiling somebody, like, you can get away with a positive documentary, I suppose, when you're talking about a David Beckham, maybe even when you're talking about a Michael Jordan. But even Michael Jordan, took his hits, I would say, in his own documentary. When you're talking about Vince McMahon, yes, you can celebrate, his successes and his incredible sort of business reputation. But his life is filled with awful events. Terrible things. And if you're going to do any sort of documenting of it, I don't see any way.
Cover, like, does he flat out, like, explain his relationship with Linda McMahon in this? Like, it's...
Yeah, I think so. I think you're going to get... I have to think again, for the filmmaker's reputation, for Netflix's reputation, you're probably going to get a more honest Vince than you have. And that's, like, I think just for his own PR even, to be able to say, I own this stuff and I'll live through it, like he always has.
The amount of like minutes spoken on these documentaries of Vince, I will find very interesting about how much they have, because Vince has an awful memory. Like, I would not want to be like, I would look at him. Yes, this guy has an unbelievable history. I just don't know how much of it he probably has.